question this week is: responsible spiritual teaching empowers rather than fostering dependency. Isn't this the way to our real divinity? Rather than devoting ourselves to someone else, even if that someone else is our teacher, is our spiritual teacher. So the question again for us: responsible spiritual teaching empowers rather than fostering dependency. Isn't this the way to our real divinity, rather than devoting ourselves to someone else, even if that someone else is our spiritual teacher? This is one of those yes and no questions, really. Yes. Because who wants to foster dependency? You don't want to foster dependency. The trouble is, humanity is in an oral condition of being dependent based on the childhood experience of early life and not being resolved. So by and large, anyone you meet is going to have an aspect of dependency. They're going to be looking for someone or something or some way or some fetish, if you will, to be dependent on. It's not something you want to foster, but hardly needs fostering. Of course, spiritual teaching should empower, or rather real spiritual teaching is bound to empower, but in a real sense, or not in a sense that we often think of it as the personality or the character being empowered, because personality and character are not innately anything other than defensive, avoiding, you see, out of relationship with life. If you're immersed in your individuality, character and personality, you're a kind of island. You're not involved in a relationship with the rest of life. You're involved in separation, you're involved in stay away. And even your so-called relationships will be prone to manipulation, antagonism, and power play. In order to maintain this islandness, or this division that comes out of separation, which itself comes out of self-identification, spiritual teaching dismantles that identification, separation, division. So when you say responsible spiritual teaching empowers, yes and no. It doesn't empower the personality, it doesn't support the defense, neither does depth psychology or depth psychotherapy. Well, it wouldn't be worthy of the name, or in the way I'm trying to use those terms. I suggest that counselling or psychotherapy or spiritual teaching, a kind of progression here, all progressively empowers, but in different ways, and dependency will be a feature of each of those different ways, of those progressive ways. And the relationship to dependency and the way in which you work with it will be different in the different levels, and so will empowerment be and look and feel and be expressed in various different ways, and yet they're all connected. You then say, isn't this the way to our real divinity? And you're right, but with this proviso, we work with the dependency, we don't avoid it, we don't try to empower the false self, We transcend it. Transcended in the sense not of avoidance or going up and out away from this present time space in which you as a human or as a spiritual being in human form manifest yourself. But you see, in order to attain your authenticity, you must challenge your inauthenticity, not empower it. You should resolve your dependency. That's a child form that's not done yet. What has to take place in order to get it done? To be in a position to say, I let go attachment through the child heart to this life, and I embrace the adult heart, the stage of maturity I'm presently participating in, or not yet participating in because I'm immersed in the past and the blueprint, the facsimile of the past as it manifests in my present life. The question then goes on to ask about devoting oneself to someone else, even if it's a spiritual teacher. And here again it's a yes, no, or a no, no, yes sort of answer. I'm going to give, not because I want to be overly complex, but let me touch on this. There are different spiritual personalities in your form, in your organism, in your individual, not in the sense of defensive, but you are this form, this organism. What is your approach to the spiritual, to the divine? It turns out people have different ways of expressing or experiencing, feeling sincerely and authentically the relationship to the divine. One is through the life of service or action or will. You give of yourself out of a great generosity of heart. That's one, service. Another is the way of knowledge or wisdom, is the direct way of encountering the divine where you are not. And there's a merging, or better, nothing but the real appears now in consciousness, and there's no separation whatsoever between what some call God and oneself, the divine, and the individual manifestation of divinity, which is your organism. That's the way of jnana yoga. It's the way of knowledge. It's the way of great wisdom. And it's distinct from service. If service involves will, or the physical form, or the active center, then the way of knowledge or wisdom involves the mind transcending the mind. You have probably, if you're spiritually inclined towards the way of knowledge and wisdom, an intellectual bent, but you have to be prepared to release attachment to that, in the same way as the person involved in service, will and action in relationship to generosity of spirit, generosity of heart, has to relinquish any outcome or result of their action, otherwise it's not truly service. Can't do something for something if this is a spiritual act. But the third way, or a third way of relationship to the divine, or real divinity perhaps as you put it, or a sincere and genuine approach to the numinous, to God, to divinity, is the way of devotion. And the way of devotion is all heart, it's all feeling. It's all openness and merging. And it may very well be then that devoting ourselves to someone else is the way. So this is the no to your question, you see, as opposed to the yes. Isn't the way to divinity, rather than devoting ourselves to someone else, isn't the way to empower ourselves and transcend dependency. I'm paraphrasing. Not if your way is the way of devotion, no. And the spiritual teacher may be a being, and it may be a stone, and it may be an animal, and it may be you see, there's no end to the possibilities of the form in which the spiritual teacher appears. So don't make the mistake of thinking that those who practice the way of devotion, who you may find hard to understand, are devoting themselves to a form or to a person or to someone else, as you say. In that devotion, then, there is no someone else. It's a real relationship, it's a spiritual relationship, it's a relationship which doesn't include separation. Therefore it is spiritually authentic. And that devotion, just the same as for others, through the way of knowledge and wisdom, through the way of service and action, this way of the heart will attain. It is one of the three ways. Diagnose your spiritual nature, your spiritual personality. Not only that, consider the outward expression or form and the inward one, because very often that may be different. You may have the appearance of somebody who is pursuing the way of wisdom, and inside you experience the way of the heart, the way of devotion. You may outwardly appear in terms of service, in terms of action and will, and not being attached to the outcome, in your heart generous form. Inside, you may be a man or woman of wisdom and knowledge, you see. Know this of yourself and know it of others, particularly when you find it harder to understand their way, their genuine spiritual way, and consider these different spiritual natures which your question has been very useful in highlighting. So thank you.